Now, our next presenter is Colonel Tim Gellel, who is the head of the Army History Unit. And he has a background with in the Australian Army, which when I was reading the book, the thing that occurred to me as being the absolute pinnacle of his achievement was to have done his staff college training in Japan, and which suggests a pretty good knowledge of the language. But he's going to talk to us now about the Takenaga Incident, and I'll give you the floor. Tim, thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to present today. I do feel like a bit of a charlatan. I'm not an academic. I actually resigned my commission a few years ago, so I'm no longer a colonel. I haven't applied to get retired after my name. And as being the head of the Army History Unit, that's a wonderful job, but it's about spreadsheets. It's not about this. This is like everyone here today, I think this is a private and personal interest. Of course, that means the views being expressed today, of course, are my own. If I could be so trite, I'd suggest retitling today's program to suit my end. I'd like to see the title please change to How to Finish the Fighting. Pressing the right button.
Try it now.
Brilliant, thank you. So on the afternoon of 30 August 1945, General Douglas MacArthur's secretary and later biographer, Major General Courtney Whitney, described how a convoy of the most decrepit vehicles I have seen made their way along the route from Japan's Atsugi Air Base to a hotel in Yokohama where MacArthur established his interim headquarters. That was when I first saw armed troops in Japan proper. All along the roadway of 15 miles to Yokohama, they stood in a long line on each side, their backs to MacArthur in a gesture of respect. They were guarding the American Supreme Commander in exactly the fashion that they had guarded their Emperor. There were two divisions of them, 30,000 men fully armed. I regarded those formidable-looking troops with a wary eye. And this is 2 weeks after Japan has formally announced it will accept the conditions of the Allies to surrender. So I asked this question: what made MacArthur and his staff confident that the Japanese army in particular would accept the Emperor's wishes and lay down their arms? One clue lies in the unnoticed Takenaga Incident, which had occurred 3 months earlier in northern New Guinea. That incident demonstrated Japanese soldiers could follow orders to capitulate with the same obedience they had hitherto shown when ordered to accept death over the shame of surrender. From the outset, Lieutenant General Adachi Hatazo's New Guinea campaign had been in trouble. In March 1943, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea saw Allied aircraft sink all 8 transports ferrying the 51st Division to Lae. 6 months later, the 41st Division's convoy lost 2 ships sunk and 3 more damaged off Wewak. Thereafter, the 18th Army knew that resupply, let alone reinforcement, would be difficult. A string of defeats followed as Adachi withdrew from Salamaua and Lae in June 1943 to Wewak. That was before US forces then landed at Aitape in his rear in April 1944. Adachi's July 1944 counterattack across the Junimore River failed, destroying much of his army's remaining fighting strength. In most armies, those pressures... I'm sorry, I missed a bit. MacArthur had left the Australians to mop up in New Guinea as he made good on his promise to return to the Philippines. By early 1945, Adachi's was an army in name only, fighting on two fronts with neither respite nor resupply, malnutrition, malaria, beriberi, dengue fever, dysentery, and other diseases all extracted a heavy toll. Adachi himself was not spared. By the year's end, he had lost all his teeth and nearly 35 kilograms in weight. In most armies, those pressures would have collapsed both morale and discipline. But the 18th Army adhered to Adachi's May 1944 order of the day: we desire life, we desire honour. If we cannot have both, we should discard life and cling to honour. The fate of Lieutenant Colonel Takenaga's 3rd Battalion, 41st Mountain Artillery Regiment, illustrates the broader Army's plight. Unable to get his remaining horses across the Seebeek River in March 1944 during the withdrawal north, Takenaga ordered them destroyed. After transferring half his guns to the 51st Division, which had lost all its artillery in the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, his gunners then man-packed their 6 remaining guns almost 130 kilometres to the Aitape perimeter. Defeated on the Drinamore, his gunners prepared to carry their guns 35 kilometres back to the Danmark River. In August, Takenaga ordered the guns destroyed to spare his remaining soldiers' lives. For that, his regiment commander berated him because he had not saved the guns at any cost. In September, Takenaga's battalion was disestablished and his surviving gunners dispersed amongst the 41st Division's infantry regiments. Although himself incapacitated by beriberi, Takenaga was appointed to command a new ad hoc infantry unit composed of around 120 men. A different commander in a different army would have considered surrender, but this was the Imperial Japanese Army, or the IJA. And Adachi was not the type to capitulate. His English language biographer describes him as a soldier of his emperor who would fight to the end, even though the 18th Army was barely capable of stalling the Australians as they cleared the remaining Japanese from New Guinea. In the face of such hardships, what did Adachi do? A strict disciplinarian, he exhorted the 18th Army to offset the absence of resupply or reinforcement with renewed fighting spirit. In October, he gave his commanders the power of summary field execution. His March 1945 orders were brutally simple. Healthy soldiers will kill 3 enemies. Sick soldiers will kill 1. Incapacitated soldiers will fight and die in place. Under no circumstances will one allow himself to be taken prisoner. Almost to a man, his officers and soldiers followed that dictum, with one notable exception. Like Adachi, Lieutenant Colonel Takenaga Masaharu was a professional soldier. At the age of 15, he committed to the Spartan life of IJA Preparatory School. In 1920, he commanded at the Military Academy, graduating as an artillery second lieutenant in 1925. Takenaga served in Korea and Manchuria, including during the 1938 Changkufeng border incident against the Soviet Union, and then in northern China from 1940 to 1943. After only a short respite in Japan, he deployed to New Guinea to command the 3rd Mountain Artillery Battalion. Naturally, the Australians employed psychological warfare operations to try and undermine the 18th Army's resistance. In relatively static areas, the Far Eastern Liaison Office, or FILO, detachments used loudspeakers to broadcast propaganda and distributed leaflets by aircraft or artillery shell. Officers and Papua New Guinean police from the Australian New Guinea Administrative Unit, or ANGAU, also used local villages to further distribute the leaflets. By 1945, FILO had refined its messages to reflect the 18th Army's circumstances. These were grounded in the self-evident truths that the Japanese were isolated, their supplies and manpower were dwindling, and there was no prospect of relief. By pointing to the many Japanese defeats in New Guinea and beyond, Filo countered Adachi's demand to withdraw upon Japanese fighting spirit to overcome the Allies' material superiority. Avoiding confronting terms like prisoner of war or surrender, Japanese soldiers were instead invited to cease fighting. And that is precisely what Lieutenant Colonel Takenaga resolved to do. With half his officers dead and the ranks of his new command reduced to 45 men, Takenaga decided to save his remaining soldiers. In late March, he broke contact with his regimental headquarters and led his men west towards the Australian lines. Soon, the Australian 6th Division headquarters at Aitape received reports of an IJA unit advancing westward, while the rest of the 18th Army was retreating to the east. Local villagers told the Angao patrol base at Drekkerkur of the 50-strong Japanese party headed towards Aitape. As this group was behind the Australian front lines, action had to be taken. Lieutenant Cyril Miles from the 2nd 5th Battalion volunteered his platoon to clear the enemy from the area. His 23-strong patrol, dubbed Miles Force, departed Aitape on 15 April, marrying up with the smaller Angao patrol at Drekkerkur 6 days later. Operating far from the rest of his unit, the task called for a clear-minded leader, and the 26-year-old Victorian, Cyril Miles, was a good choice. Having enlisted in 1939, he'd soldiered in Greece and North Africa before reaching the rank of sergeant and then being commissioned in February 1943. In July, he was wounded at Mubo and awarded the Military Cross for his tenacious leadership and courage. He was a soldier's officer of the type the AIF was renowned for. And in 1944, he was court-martialed and placed under 4 days open arrest for disobeying a lawful command. But in the field, he was rock solid. He was described as a remarkable leader of men who would take patrols to places that nobody else had, leading them with a quiet assurance. The difficulty of Miles' task soon became apparent. Establishing themselves at Drekkerkur on the 24th of April, Miles' force set out on a 2-day fighting patrol to Kubriwat, where they came across 40 well-dug-in enemy. After a short, sharp encounter, Miles returned to Drekkerkur, telling his platoon to rest for a day, Anzac Day, before having another crack at the Japanese. By the 2nd of May, the Japanese had reached the village of Wongram. There, Miles recalled a white flag had been placed in a village. And I actually should say it wasn't a flag, it was one of the Japanese soldiers' fundoshi or underwear. Angao constables brought in a Filo surrender leaflet, and you see that on the left-hand side here. And on that leaflet, Takenaga's adjutant had written in clumsy English, "Look here, our Japan soldier no fighting. Our old Japan soldier hold up you. We wish taking you. Please you, your Australia captain, come to that white flag." After a tense battlefield parley, Miles accepted the surrender of Takenaga's 42-strong battalion the next day. At the time, it was the largest Japanese Army combat force to intentionally surrender to the Allies. Keen to exploit the unprecedented mass surrender, Filo quickly adjusted its psychological operations. Warrant Officer Albert Kleestad, who was running the local Filo detachment, employed 2 of Takenaga's NCOs to broadcast surrender messages along the 17th Brigade's front. But no immediate result was apparent. I should add, Kleestad is a Victorian. Greater success came in late June when a new leaflet, seen here, was addressed to officers of the 18th Army. It quoted Takenaga's reason for surrender and expressed his sincere wish that others may follow my example. A further simpler leaflet was ready by early July, and it again referred to the surrender in May of a complete Japanese Army unit of 5 officers and 37 men. Enraged, General Adachi censured the division commander, and he then confronted the 239th Regiment commander. With tears streaming down his face, he led the regimental colonel and his staff as they ritually bowed before the regimental colours in symbolic atonement to their emperor. Fearing contagion, Adachi sought to further stiffen his soldiers' resolve. His new orders on 15 July called for the entire 18th Army to fight to the death. Even in an army known for its disdain of surrender, such a direct order on such a scale was unprecedented. Despite Adachi's order, surrenders increased. In the war's final 2 weeks, 62 Japanese soldiers surrendered to the 17th Brigade. In the preceding months, only 75 prisoners had been captured across all of New Guinea. The Australians' conclusion that these prisoners displayed no knowledge of Tokyo's anticipated capitulation indicated that local conditions, including knowledge gained through the Philo PSYOPs leaflets of Takenaga's surrender, had led to increased surrenders. The question remained though, would much larger armies being assembled in Japan have to be ground down like the rest of the 18th Army before they contemplated accepting defeat? Influence of Takenaga's surrender extended beyond just the New Guinea theatre. Events soon proved it would have an impact on the way the war with Japan concluded. Miles' force returned to 17 Brigade headquarters with what was the largest single haul of prisoners taken by Australian forces. Over the course of the war, Australian forces had captured 1,095 Japanese prisoners, an average of less than 1 prisoner a day. And Takenaga was amongst the most senior of Japanese officers to have surrendered to this point in the war. Warrant Officer Klestad from Philo undertook a preliminary interrogation of the prisoners at 17 Brigade headquarters before Takenaga and about half of his men were flown to the main interrogation camp at Lae. There, Takenaga's soldiers were interrogated by New Zealand Army linguist Lieutenant Eric Thompson. Despite having surrendered, the Japanese prisoners were evasive and they gave false names to deceive their interrogators. However, their cover didn't hold up for long, and once compromised, Takenaga opened up to Thompson's questions. When Takenaga said that his soldiers had only surrendered because he had ordered them to, Thompson asked whether IJA commanders would surrender if the Emperor ordered it. Takenaga agreed they would. Under the subheading of the Emperor as a means of surrender, Thompson reported that if Japan's armies received orders from the Emperor to cease fighting, there is no doubt they would do so. The Allies need have no fear about independent armies continuing the fight after the surrender. When that report reached MacArthur's headquarters in the Philippines, Thompson's detachment was ordered to evacuate Takenaga forward to Manila. That was on the 10th of July, and that was to allow MacArthur's staff to interrogate him directly. There, US forces were preparing a contingency plan, a plan for the improbable. That is, the sudden collapse or surrender of the Japanese government and high command. Takenaga's emphatic statement corroborated a contemporaneous report that had been compiled by 3 selected Japanese civilians in the Philippines at the US 6th Army's direction. They similarly had predicted a surrender message from the Emperor would ensure the peaceful capitulation of the extensive Japanese army forces. Combined, Takenaga's interrogation and the 6th Army report gave confidence to the hypothesis that Japanese forces could cease fighting if their Emperor ordered it. That contingency plan, Operation Blacklist, was completed on 15 July, 1 month before the surrender. Its assumptions were tested 6 weeks later, when the convoy of decrepit vehicles safely bore General MacArthur's party through the silent ranks of armed but surrendered Japanese soldiers and towards what his biographer described as MacArthur's rendezvous with destiny. Thank you for being so generous with your time.